Trump has been trying to make the military his own for a long time, and it seems like he's starting to make progress, and that is scary. We'll do a breakdown of how and why he's manufacturing this crisis situation in Los Angeles. As expected, Elon bent the knee to Trump, but does it matter anymore? We'll try and read the TRT leaves. Finally, we'll talk to New York Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado about his campaign for governor against the current governor. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join a majority. This is Majority 54. Do you see what I did there with the TRT little joke there, Ravi? Anyway, go right ahead.
All right. Well, obviously, we're going to start with LA and everything happening on the streets there, the clash between protesters and others and the federal government, and the clash between the state and city leadership and the Trump administration. Let's just start with a clip from LA officials who called for a curfew last night.
Thank you, Mayor Bass. Good afternoon, everyone. As the mayor stated, a curfew for the impacted area shown here will go into effect tonight. And I want to be absolutely clear that if you're within that designated curfew zone between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. And are not exempt under the order, you're going to be subject to arrest. The curfew boundaries are as follows: from the 5 freeway to the 110 freeway, and from the 10 freeway to the point where the 110 and the 5 merge. Easier to look at it on that map for description. The curfew is necessary, a necessary measure to protect lives and safeguard property following several consecutive days of growing unrest throughout the city.
So, the background here is that the Trump administration made pretty aggressive targets and claims around deportations. It was reported, I think, first in the Wall Street Journal about a week or two ago that Stephen Miller held a meeting at ICE headquarters where he basically convened the senior leadership and pushed them to go beyond traditional ICE deportation methods, which were largely centered on finding and deporting people who were convicted of crimes other than immigration-related crimes. So, the crime beyond living and working here without proper authorization. So people who had criminal charges or allegations against them, et cetera. And so he wanted them to go to places like Home Depots and places where people congregate to work as a way to get the numbers up. And so that was reported on. And then what we had in LA is that starting on Friday night, ICE officials were going to places like Home Depots and trying to arrest and deport people. And that led to a clash between ICE officials and people on the ground. And there is a lot that's in dispute about what those clashes have looked like. I think the fair assessment here by anybody's account is that there is a lot of peaceful protests combined with some civil disobedience. And then there is also a subset of these activities that are violent and that do include vandalism, and that the LAPD and state officials were reacting to that, making arrests, clearing the streets, and that at various points it was calming down. And depending on who you ask, and this is a timing that we can get into, the Trump administration seemed to rush to take an unprecedented action by nationalizing the National Guard, which, if it's confusing to people, the National Guard is, you probably know the ins and outs of this way better than I do.
You mean to just explain this?
Yeah, explain it.
So the National Guard is a component. It is a reserve component of the United States military. However, it has two different statuses that it can be in. When it is not federalized, which is the vast majority of the time, the National Guard basically reports to, as its commander-in-chief, the governor of the state, which is why they're used for crowd control, why they're used for, in weather disasters, that kind of thing, in like riot control, that kind of stuff. But, for 20 years, as a recent example, for 20 years of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the National Guard was federalized and was used like any other part of the Army Reserve or the Air Force Reserve. just troops that could be deployed. They are trained exactly the same way. If you are in the Air National Guard, you went to Air Force basic training and then went to an Air Force job school. If you're in the Army National Guard, you went to Army basic training and then went to an Army job school. To be an officer, I was an officer in the Army National Guard. I was also an officer at one point in the Army Reserve. It's the exact same thing. The only difference is that when you are serving in the National Guard, you have a dual mission, this other mission. So for Trump to federalize them for a purpose other than deploying them, like to a place like Iraq or Afghanistan or down to the southern border, to do that is basically akin to when troops were federalized to make sure that schools could be integrated in the South. I mean, that's essentially what that's the historical comparison here.
Yeah, that incident, I think, which is the better approximation because it was basically against the will of the local authorities. So that's the closest approximation, which is not in most people's lifetime who's listening to this. The other example that's being mentioned is LA in the early 90s. The difference there was the local authorities wanted federal troops there, and they wanted a federal presence in part because the dispute was with the LAPD. So it made sense.
Can I give you another reason, Robbie?
Yeah.
Another reason that you would do that if you were governor and you would ask for federal guard troops to be federalized and sent to you is when you want troops beyond just your own. When you're like in the Rodney King riots, if you were looking at it saying this is a very diffused, very large disturbance, and we need more than just California National Guard, you would ask that they be federalized so they could be sent from other states. Another example of that is when troops were sent to the Capitol after January 6th, not all of whom I believe were federalized, although I could be wrong. Some of them were just sent by other states.
And the allegation here from Newsom and officials on the ground in California is that they had this under control and that things picked back up once Trump intervened. I can't say I know for sure whether that allegation is true or not. I find it really hard to figure out what's going on the ground. But here's what Gavin Newsom had to say.
Thanks to our law enforcement officers and the majority of Angelenos who protested peacefully, the situation was winding down and was concentrated in just a few square blocks downtown. But that's not what Donald Trump wanted. He again chose escalation. He chose more force. He chose theatrics over public safety. He federalized another 2,000 Guard members. He deployed more than 700 active U.S. Marines. These are the men and women trained for foreign combat, not domestic law enforcement. We honor their service. We honor their bravery. But we do not want our streets militarized by our own armed forces, not in LA, not in California, not anywhere.
So that's really significant. I mean, it's not true. It's not accurate to make a distinction, which he really wasn't doing, but it kind of comes across this way, to say like the Marines are trained for foreign warfare. I mean, they're both trained for that. In fact, there's not that many parts of the Guard that are even trained for domestic disturbance control. But there are elements of it that are, and it is something you can train on in a situation like this. But it is clearly what Trump is trying to do in my view, he is trying to have this situation portrayed as one that is so hairy that he had to take this action, when in reality, he just took this action because he wants it to look really hairy. And I've seen nothing to indicate that we're anywhere near the level of, was it 20 or 21, the George Floyd, protests. It just doesn't seem like we're there at all.
I mean, that's what people seem to be saying. Obviously, like the images, this is an area where like social media is so unhelpful in so many ways, is that there's so many images going around and it's hard to know like what's the context of this image. Was that today, yesterday? Was this at the beginning, the end? Was that person arrested? And there are obviously a lot of claims going around that are false, including by the president of the United States, who seem to have deliberately misled people in in when he talked about when it was he was in communication with Gavin Newsom or not, and Fox News deceptively edited that comment to clean up after the president. But I think the big question here, and what California is suing about, is whether this is legal or not. And this is a hairy area of law. And like with most things with Trump, what we are learning is that unfortunately, presidents generally have a lot of latitude in a lot of different things, and we have been counting on our presidents to exercise discretion. And, as with all areas of executive power, it seems Trump is testing the limits of that power and using whatever powers he can gather, whether he explicitly has them or whether he can count on the Supreme Court backing him up. And this is one of those areas where you have this, West Wing fans are going to know this term, posse comitatus, which essentially says that you cannot use troops, whether they're like Marines and, traditional military personnel, or National Guard. If the National Guard is nationalized, they become federal troops at this point for the purposes of law. You can't use those troops for law enforcement activities. And what does it mean to be a law enforcement activity is, obviously a hairy area, right? And I think right now what you're seeing is Marines, and this is, again, like, the context is hard to know in any given video, but there are videos of Marines arresting people or seeming to arrest people. So is that a law enforcement activity or not? Or are they just protecting federal ICE agents to allow the agents to carry out their activities? Is that law enforcement activity? Are they just preventing civil unrest within the United States? Would that be allowed? And there are a couple of different provisions that are carve-outs to posse comitatus. One is the Insurrection Act, which the Trump administration, and this goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, the Trump administration has not invoked this, in part because the language implies that you would need the state to back you up on that. There's a different law, Title 10 of the U.S. Code, which essentially allows the president to call on federal service members, quote, in the case of a rebellion or danger of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, or when the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. That's pretty broad. So the question is going to come down to, are these troops being used for law enforcement activity or not?
Here's what I think is happening here. If you recall, during the transition period, there was a lot of talk by the incoming Trump administration about using the military to enforce immigration laws and to deport a lot of people using the military. And there was a lot of pushback on that. And they realized they couldn't just come out of the gates and use the military to reinforce ICE and to do the deportations that they wanted to do. So I believe that what we are seeing here is the domestic equivalent of a Gulf of Tonkin situation, which, for those who don't know, the Gulf of Tonkin was the inciting event that pretty well led to the political permission slip that Johnson used to escalate the war in Vietnam. And most scholars agree at this point, looking back, that it kind of didn't happen, that it was a rather manufactured situation where it appeared that there was a firing on U.S. troops when there really probably wasn't, and that's what was used to deploy a lot more troops to Vietnam. And I think that the Trump administration figured out that it is not a popular idea coming out of the gates of the administration to reinforce ICE with the United States military, and that the picture of the U.S. military helping conduct immigration raids on American streets was not a picture that people were down for. And so I believe that what they're doing is in a Gulf of Tonkin style approach. They are using the situation in Los Angeles and escalating it on purpose and making it seem bigger than it is, to make it seem like it was out of their hands and they were forced to bring the military in to reinforce these activities so that they can do it all over the rest of the country. And I think that's really scary.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's like a couple layers of potential motive here. One is to improve the numbers, in part based on what I was talking about with Stephen Miller, is like he wants maximum deportations. Two is to raise the publicity and profile of enforcement actions against immigrants as a way to scare other immigrants into either self-deporting or not arriving here. Three is to provoke the left into fights that make the left look bad. And then fourth is to provoke a response that allows them to, escalate their own consolidation of power. And David Frum wrote a great piece in The Atlantic about this yesterday. Essentially, like, this is not just about immigration, it's about elections and other things. Like, they basically want as much emergency power as possible. One obvious rejoinder that I think is important is this is an administration that's saying that anytime you strike a cop, et cetera, it's unacceptable, which that is a sentence I agree with. Nobody should ever strike a cop, and anybody who's striking police officers or anybody, vandalizing small businesses, government facilities, government property, government agents, even if you don't agree with what those agents are doing, if you strike those people, you should accept the consequences for that, and you should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. The problem for Republicans is that they are not consistent on this issue. Here's a clip of Speaker Johnson being asked about this.
I'm glad the president has a strong hand in this.
Mr. Speaker, you guys are condemning the violent protesters in LA. Is it hypocritical given the president pardoned the violent protesters on January 6th?
Look, no, I think there's a clear distinction between those two. We've seen what's happened in LA in the early 90s and in other times when these things get out of control and they burn whole city blocks down and shut the place down. You have to stay on top of that. You cannot let it get out of control. And I think federalizing the National Guard was important. I think if Marines are necessary to maintain order, we have to do what is.
So what's the difference? You said there's a distinct. What's the difference between the violent protesters and January 6th?
Everybody wants me to relitigate January 6th. I'm not going to do that. There's a very clear distinction between the two. The people who broke the law and destroyed property, met with the proper consequences on that. That's what we're trying to be intellectually consistent about.
What sort of authorities do you think the Marines should have there on the ground? What sort of authorities?
Maintain peace and protect property. They're protecting federal property and personnel, and that is a very appropriate and necessary thing to do, and I applaud the president for doing it.
Thank you, sir.
So,
yeah, sorry.
It's important to point out there that he said the people who did that on January 6th met with the proper consequences.
They're pardoned.
Which means he believes that them being pardoned is the proper consequences. Is that also the proper consequences for people that are arrested in this situation? I doubt he would say so.
Well, it's funny. He doesn't want to relitigate January 6th, but he's talking about the early 90s.
Right, exactly.
Well, okay. I'm trying to make it a habit here to pierce our bubble on this podcast. And I think it's important for people to look at the clips that are circulating outside of Democratic and liberal circles. And here's one of them. This is of a woman, I think it's a Latino woman trying to get to work, and a protester. And I'm only mentioning the race here because this is how it's being commented on online. And then there's
I think it's a black woman
or black woman.
Yeah.
And then a white or two white protesters talking to this woman as she's trying to get to work.
I don't care. I know, and these people are having their children taken. But what about my kids?
Look at this.
That's what happens to my kids. I can't help it. This is what. But you can if you could just move out the way. You're not going to. How is this a peaceful protest if there's no peace? No, it's not.
How do y'all as white people feel about stopping a black woman from going to work?
Oh no, not work. I care so much.
So you don't care about stopping black people from going to work?
Look at this line that you guys are causing. I'm not causing no problems. I'm not trying to. We're just trying to leave.
Yeah, I mean, it's a video from Talking Points USA. It's effective messaging.
Yeah, and I think I actually don't know what to do about things like this, because you're like, anytime a ton of people show up, you're gonna get people who are tone deaf, and
like, you mean the protesters that are in that video?
Yeah. Like, first of all, there's any number of ways to handle that situation. I don't know who those people are, and I don't want to sound like Alex Jones with conspiracies about who those people are, because the thing is, I've been to a lot of these things, and no matter who those people are, I've met people like that. So whether this is genuine or not, I have no idea. But there are people like that. I have no doubt there are people like that who show up to the protests. And I think the question for people who are listening to this is, when you are faced with clips like this, what do you do about it? And I don't have an easy answer, because it does suck that this gets mixed up with a lot of other, I would say, more respectful, clearer messaging from people who are showing up. I think clearly, especially if you watch the video, this person, the protesters, is mocking this woman for for mentioning work. And so there's this sanctimony around, we're here to protest while you're being worried about work, is just not a great frame. I think the wider point of it all is to be like, look, like, anytime people show up, there's going to be a lot of nonsense and there's going to be a lot of good in a situation like this. Here's what and this is what I said on Lost Debate yesterday, is be like, here's what my belief about immigration should be. Like, you shouldn't be arresting people who are just showing up to Home Depot to work. You shouldn't be arresting people when they're showing up for their hearings, because it deters them from actually showing up to their hearings. We should allow more people into this country. The people who are already here, who are law-abiding citizens outside of their immigration status, we should find ways to keep them here and make them legal, because we need people to do this kind of work, especially in a place like LA that just burned down. So we need people at Home Depot rebuilding our houses. So that's my policy preference. And then here's how I would like people to protest, which is peacefully, and in the case of civil disobedience, be willing to accept the consequences of civil disobedience, like we have long had, whether it's Gandhi or MLK or Mandela. Like, if you're going to block a federal facility or you're going to block a police car, you are going to do that knowing full well that you could and very likely will be arrested, and that you're going to go peacefully when you do. And anybody who deviates from that is not the protest that I'm joining. That's how I would explain it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to handle it. The very first episode that we ever did of Majority 54 was an interview with Bruce Franks, and it was about peaceful protests. He had been a Ferguson activist, and one of the things he said is that, unfortunately, in order for a protest to get noticed, you have to make people uncomfortable. This is an example of probably making some of the wrong people uncomfortable and needing a strategy to mitigate that problem. Right. But if you reverse this and it's somebody who is trying to get to the mall, and it's like a white person from the suburbs trying to get to the mall, that's the kind of thing Bruce was talking about. That if you want that person to care about the plight of people who are being unfairly picked up and separated from their families, you have to make that person uncomfortable. And so, this is something where I think if I would say the things you said, and I would say, and I would hope that there'd be people in charge of the protests in favor of the things I care about that would handle them tactically better than that.
Right.
Now, we have a couple more clips we could go to. We're going to, I think, skip a couple of these, and then we'll go to an ad break. And when we come back, I want to break down how it is that I believe Trump is using this situation to try to more deeply politicize the military and bring it to his side. And in fact, I'm going to play some clips of how he's tried to do this in the past and it's been unsuccessful, and how I see him doing it now and why I think we should be concerned about it. So let's go ahead and go to a quick break. Typical children's vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk growing kids should never eat. That's why Hi-Ya was created, the pediatrician-approved superpowered chewable vitamin. While most children's vitamins are filled with 5 grams of sugar and can contribute to a variety of health issues, Hi-Ya is made with 0 sugar and 0 gummy junk, yet it tastes great and it's perfect for picky eaters. Hi-Ya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. Formulated with the help of nutritional experts, Hi-Ya is pressed with a blend of 12 organic fruits and veggies, then supercharged with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, including vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, mood, concentration, teeth, bones, and more. It's non-GMO, vegan, dairy-free, allergy-free, gelatin-free, nut-free, and everything else you can imagine. Hi-Ya is designed for kids of all ages and sent straight to your door so parents have one less thing to worry about. It's also fun to say, Hi-Ya. As you know, I'm a father and I'm always on the lookout for the best possible vitamins for my child to take. I'm so happy I've come across Hi-Ya Health. The ingredients are amazing and I don't have to worry about sugar or gummy junk because Hi-Ya Health is made without that stuff and it's still able to keep that great taste. We've worked out a special deal with Hi-Ya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/majority. This deal is not available on the regular website, so go to hiyahealth.com/majority and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults.
For men, dealing with ED can be uncomfortable, which is why HIMS provides access to a comfortable solution with an online process and personalized treatment options. HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable tablets, Viagra and Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% less. And the process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. You just fill out an intake form on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. And with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, Hims can help you find the ED option that works for you. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/majority. That's HIMS.com/majority for your personalized ED treatment options. HIMS.com/majority. The featured products include compounded products which are not approved nor verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
All right. Now, you may have heard or seen this clip over the last few days where Trump is at Fort Bragg and he's speaking to paratroopers. He's speaking to soldiers. And he's saying some insanely partisan stuff. And we're going to get to that clip in a moment. What may have stood out to you about it is the way a lot of those soldiers were reacting. They seem to have reacted a little more like a Trump rally crowd, which is what he's really wanted. And he's been doing this for a long time. For a long time, Trump has been going, even during the first Trump administration, going to military bases to captive audiences, military crowds, and saying the same kind of crap that he says in front of, big rally, Trump events. And usually he gets a more muted reaction. And it's clearly always bothered him because one of his objectives is to make it his military and to be able to do what he's trying to do right now in LA, which is deploy it against the rest of us domestically. So what I want to do here is I want to take a couple of clips from a speech he gave in Qatar in front of airmen 3 weeks ago and show you a kind of a frightening thing, which is how Trump is learning on the spot and figuring out how to more radicalize and politicize the military. So Jeremy, go ahead and play the first clip from Qatar 3 weeks ago.
You go back 6 months ago, we couldn't get people to join the military. Nobody wanted your job. Now everybody wants your job. So we went from having the worst numbers we've ever had in terms of recruitment. That included police officers also, firefighters, but police officers. But in the military, think of that. You couldn't get people to join the military, and now we're brimming over. We have the highest numbers we probably, minimum 30 years, but probably have ever had, because there's such an incredible spirit now in our country. We have a whole new spirit, and it began on a date, November 5th, that was election day. Under the Trump administration, America is back, and America's military is back, bigger, better, and stronger than ever before.
Okay, so all that crap he said is not true, but let's forget about that for a moment. Let's think about the optics of what he was trying to do there. If you look behind him, right, the setup behind him, it's all men. Now he's in Qatar at an Air Force base. I've been to that Air Force base. I went in and out of there on the way to Afghanistan and back, and there's a lot of women who serve at that base. But he and Pete Hegseth have this 80s action movie idea of what the military is supposed to be. So they just got a bunch of dudes and put him behind him. And then he said a bunch of really partisan stuff. And it all built to that thing he was saying there about how now it's bigger and badder. That was an applause line. And you could see that he thought he was going to get an applause line and he didn't get it. And that's because members of the military do understand that there's a certain decorum that they're supposed to have and that they're not supposed to engage in anything that sounds partisan. And they know how they're supposed to react. Now, we're going to go to the second clip from this speech, and you're going to see where Trump figures out what it is he needs to say in order to make people in the military think it's okay to cheer and not necessarily realize that it's a partisan statement. So let's play the second clip.
To them, he said, "Sir, I'm telling you, you want, we can do it in 3 weeks." And that's what he did. He knocked out 100% of the ISIS caliphate in 3 weeks.
So he realized, if I structure what I'm saying to members of the military as you and me are on the same side against our mutual enemies, and And the only way, and he thought he was doing that every time he talked about the left. And in the same speech, he said stuff about Joe Biden being crooked and terrible in these elections and these people hate America. But he didn't get applause. He didn't get whoops or hollers for any of that. But then when he made it a situation where visually what's in their minds is American service members standing against people who they've been ordered to stand against, now they, innately they feel that they're to applaud, right? So now with that in mind, let's look at this clip from this insanely partisan speech that he gave, I think yesterday or the day before at Fort Bragg, and how he takes that little piece of learning and turns it into an even more partisan thing he can say. But now he's getting them to applaud because he's talking about a situation where American service members have been deployed. And let's see how they react.
In many ways, it's tougher when they're not wearing a uniform because you don't know exactly who they are. In Los Angeles, the governor of California, the mayor of Los Angeles, they're incompetent, and they paid troublemakers, agitators, and insurrectionists. They're engaged in this willful attempt to nullify federal law and aid the occupation of the city by criminal invaders. That's what it is. They're invaders, no different. Their position is that the rioting will not stop unless ICE withdraws from Los Angeles and ceases the enforcement of federal immigration law. In other words, they came in here illegally.
So that, Ravi, is really frightening. Because what he has figured out is he's figured out that if he deploys the military into a situation on American shores and then against his political enemies, that's how he can manufacture the military coming to his side, because now he has literally put them on his side. And that's one of the most frightening things I've seen so far in this administration.
Yeah, this is not great. And, this is in line with a lot of warnings that people made about this administration that people thought were hyperbolic before this election. And a lot of us have been saying this kind of stuff going back to last time. The difference last time was that he had people like Mattis around him and Kelly for whatever criticisms we have of them, were much more willing to stand up to Trump on this kind of stuff than Hegseth and Stephen Miller and these types. So we're in dangerous territory here. It's worth mentioning that Trump has a military parade planned for this weekend in Washington, D.C., and he was asked about protesters showing up to this parade.
Celebrating big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protester who wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And I haven't even heard about a protest, but, this is people that hate our country, but they will be met with very heavy force. Thank you very much, everyone.
Look at what he's doing there, right? First of all, with an offhanded comment, he created a whole news story about a thing that didn't exist. He even acknowledged that it didn't exist. But again, look at the framing. He is having the military go do a parade, which is really for him, right? It's a North Korea style parade. And then he's pretending people want to come and protest. So what is he doing? He's sending the message to the military that these people are not protesting me or my policies. They're protesting you. They hate America and they hate you. That is potentially very effective messaging. And it is also, I think, really scary. And we have to stand up to it.
Well, speaking of standing up, there's these No Kings rallies all around the country happening at the same time. I think the main one is in Philadelphia, which I think they were choosing not to be in DC in part, I think, because they didn't want this confrontation. Everything I've seen, I'm not too familiar with these folks, but I think the indivisible people who I think are behind this better than I do. I have heard, from people that they are messaging very clearly to respect law enforcement, bring an American flag, be respectful. So I think they're modeling, I think what we were talking about earlier, which is we should be disciplined. We should be very cognizant of the optics that we have, and we should be inclusive. And I think one of the things that I'm not saying that my criticisms of the protests rank anywhere near my criticism of the Trump administration here. So there's a reason why this order of operations is what it is. But I think showing up to a protest about immigration and waving either a Palestinian flag or an Israeli flag or talking about issues unrelated to that issue that you show up to protest with, look, you're free to do whatever you want. But if you want your protest to be inclusive, make it about the thing you're protesting and nothing else, because that's the way you broaden the coalition. Now, show up to your pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian protests separately, and I'll never be mad at you for that. But if you want to make it inclusive, wave the American flag, talk about immigration, talk about the people being deported, talk about Trump using the military to scare our neighbors, and only talk about that because we need a broad coalition for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, because if you're not doing that, you're also kind of making it about yourself.
Yes.
You know, like that like if it's about the cause, make it about the cause, and don't make it about you. Don't, you know, I think that's really what we're saying.
Well, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, you and I haven't talked about Elon yet. So we got to talk about Elon versus Trump. And then we've got the lieutenant governor, maybe future governor of New York, joining us in Antonio Delgado. I need to tell you about our incredible sponsor, Dupe.com. Have you ever fallen in love with a couch, lamp, or rug online, and then your soul leaves your body when you see the price tag? Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret called Dupe.com. It's incredibly easy to use, and all you have to do is type Dupe.com / before any product URL, and it instantly shows you similar and more affordable alternatives. These aren't sketchy knockoffs either. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Most furniture sold online is mass produced in the same exact factories, and those factories then sell to brands under different names who then list them for different prices. Dupe.com automatically lists these less expensive alternatives for you, so you're not paying just for some brand name. Millions of people have already used Dupe to save money, and it's 100% free to use. That $5,000 cloud sofa you don't think you can justify? The beautiful mid-century dresser you've had bookmarked for forever? Dupe will find a similar item, sometimes even the same item, for 60, 70, or 80% off. And with Dupe.com, you can finally decorate the house of your dreams without going broke. Dupe.com isn't about furniture either, or just about furniture. Dupe works for fashion, shoes, jewelry, and more. And Dupe.com really is so easy to use. Just type DUPE.com / before any product URL in your browser, and boom, it instantly finds you less expensive alternatives. They even have an app and a browser extension you could download. No account required, no sign up required. It's completely free to use. Stop wasting money on brand names and start saving with Dupe.com today.
If you've ever searched for your name or address in Google, it's shocking to find how many results have your personal information, and it's not by chance. Data brokers and people search sites collect your personal information, your name, address, phone number, financial info, income, and hundreds of other records. They sell and share it publicly without your consent. But Incogni is here to put an end to that. It hunts down these unethical sites, and it gets your info removed from the places that expose your private information. You don't have to email anyone, fill out forms, or jump through hoops. They handle the entire process for you. Incogni also continuously monitors if your data is put back onto those databases, requesting repeated removals. This way, keeping them off it forever. So you get way less spam calls, spam emails, and you get more peace of mind. And best of all, you can cancel anytime, and they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can get it completely risk-free. Right now, you can get 60% off an annual plan by going to incogni.com and use code majority54. That's INCOGNI.com /majority54, and use the code majority54 at checkout. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Get 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com /majority54 and use code majority54 at checkout.
So last week on our podcast, we speculated that, we pointed out that Trump and Musk had kind of stepped right up to the line of a direct confrontation, and we were just speculating as to how long it would take for one of them to cross that line. It didn't take very long. We assume everybody listening to this knows the ins and outs of that conflict. It got pretty heated pretty fast. There were accusations of pedophilia that you pointed out on the internet. I saw that made it.
That's right. This all happened like after we recorded last week, right?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
I actually took to Lost Debate to do like a live pod, and actually normally those are very good for us, but I was so like out of it, like in terms of just I had been staring at X all day that I don't even feel like I had an opinion because it was so shocking.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the best pod ever. But one thing I did say was that Trump is undefeated in his battles against people within the GOP, and that Musk is the most formidable adversary he's ever had within the GOP in terms of Musk's financial power, his
Reach.
his reach, his contracts with the federal government, and Musk's seeming propensity to cross lines and escalate fights like Trump. Now, something you and I have talked about before on this podcast is this question of whether Musk truly is unhinged or whether he pretends to be unhinged. And evidence for the pretend argument is that he seems to have a lot of restraint when it comes to China. Like, he doesn't criticize China. And though Musk lobbed some grenades at Trump, I think we've got more evidence that Musk plays the crazy guy who's unhinged. And actually, when it's his bottom line and his self-interest, he gets very disciplined really fast, because what he has done is walk back. He deleted some of the offending posts against Trump, and he tweeted the following. I regret some of my posts about President Donald Trump last week. They went too far. It looks like Trump has cowed Elon Musk. That's what it seems like.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, we found out last week that people in the White House were working directly with Musk and his people and trying to figure out how they could come to some sort of truce, right? And then what do we have here? We have, if you look at his feed, which first of all, I find it so irritating that I have to see every one of Elon Musk's.
Right.
I don't follow him. I don't get alerts, but they all show up no matter which part of your feed you're looking at. But if you look at his feed, he says this. As you said, he went back and deleted several, and then it's just back to talking about rockets and cars
and immigration. Though he sounds like he did before all of this.
Yeah, that's true.
And also, I haven't seen too much criticism of the bill this week either.
Right. So this is he's saying to himself, well, I'm stepping away from politics anyway. I'm just going to say this thing. And what does he do here? He doesn't back away from everything, but he does just enough. I mean, look, when Trump is in a situation where he settles a lawsuit, he goes on stage and says that he was exonerated. Mm-hmm. So when Musk says, I regret some, he knows that he's handing a permission slip to Trump to say Musk took it all back, everything he said. And that's what he's doing here. And I mean, the guy is a coward. I don't know. I mean, there's not news here other than that was fun for a little while.
I think the news is that Trump is every bit as powerful as we feared in terms of like they're really
that party.
Within that party, like there was a lot of speculation, from people being like, well, Musk is showing Tim Cook and Zuckerberg or whatever, what it means to stand up to Trump and that you could do it. And I think that was wishful thinking.
Yeah. I never thought any of that was real.
Because if you're Musk in this situation, everybody's like, well, Musk could be, he can cause trouble for Trump. Sure. Trump doesn't have to run again though. So there's very limited trouble. The kind of trouble Trump could cause for Musk is severe. He can sic the Justice Department after him. He can investigate them for antitrust issues. He can cut their contracts. And Trump doesn't care about the good of the country. So if we're not supplying our International Space Station, what does Trump care?
Right. If there's a small, not victory, but if there's a thing to hope for out of this, it is that this could be the icing on the cake that disincentivize Musk from re-engaging in Republican politics in a major way in future elections. Now, I don't know that it will, because he seemed to have really liked that attention.
Yes.
And he also, as a guy who at its root has made his fortune as a government contractor, he has many incentives to re-engage, but there is some hope that, in the midterms and then in 28, that when they go to him and they say, we'd like you to put $145 million into this or that again, that he says, it's not worth it. That's the hope that comes out of this.
Right. Well, we'll obviously continue to monitor that situation. One other sort of under the radar, sort of, in a normal week, this would be all we're talking about, is that RFK Jr., who is, if people aren't aware, our health secretary, unfortunately, fired all 17 members of the advisory committee on immunization at the CDC. And this is a panel that has a ton of influence. And I think for some people, like in normal times, you just take for granted that these things exist. Now, people are like, well, what is this panel? They're not the people who license and approve vaccines. This is the panel that determines who gets the vaccine. And I think why this is particularly troubling is because they are the people who set policy that insurance companies look to when they decide what vaccines to cover and not. And so if they are mixed on the efficacy and the usefulness of certain vaccines, insurance companies could use that as cover not to cover those immunizations and vaccines. And that could cause all kind of problems with herd immunity. I think it also is telling because it just tells us no matter what this policy does, which it's actually pretty significant, it tells you what's going to be going on behind the scenes in all the science that's coming out of not just the HHS, but the CDC, the NIH. They're going to be cooking up the kind of science that validates their own worldview on vaccines, which is a generally skeptical take on vaccines. And this is what we have to live with now.
Yeah, this is laundering and legitimizing. I mean, this is Dick Cheney feeding information to the New York Times about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction, and then when they quote an anonymous high-level source saying that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, Dick Cheney goes on Meet the Press and says, according to the New York Times, they have weapons of mass destruction. Like, it's the same thing. We're very skeptical of vaccines. We're going to put a bunch of people in these official government positions that are very skeptical of vaccines, and then we're going to say, look, the government itself says that there's reason for skepticism about these vaccines. So I would be on the lookout for this and be prepared to tell people exactly how that came to be.
Well, we'll talk more about this in future weeks because there's a really interesting discussion about the politics of this. And, this is one of those issues where there is a small group of people who care a lot about the signaling that RFK does around this kind of stuff, and so are really happy with him for this, like that Maha group. And then there's the rest of us who all benefit from the status quo on vaccines. And so it's one of those areas where there's this dilute, super enthusiastic interest in it. And then the rest of us who are just like, oh, this is something we take for granted. Mm-hmm. And it's hard politics because unless we start voting on this issue, the politics are in Trump's favor where he's like, okay, I can always count on this 5% of the electorate. And that's like a really important 5% that are going to be really enthusiastic for me. So we'll come back to this. But in the meantime, we have a special guest today, the current lieutenant governor of the state of New York, formerly represented a section of New York, which I think, Jason, you spent some time in the Hudson Valley. I spent a lot of time up there. And he worked in the Obama White House as well. And he is now running for governor in the primary against our sitting governor, Kathy Hochul. Excited to welcome on Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. How's it going?
All right. How's the race going?
It's underway. What I'm excited about is meeting people where they are, engaging with them in a real way, and elevating their concerns. I just think for too long, the status quo has been broken. And here in New York, what we've seen is a tendency to want to manage the situation and to sort of paper over the situation, knowing that we are a blue state. And it's very typical for Democrats to run the state. And I think if anything, we should take away from Trump's success, particularly here in New York, where we saw the largest swing from left to right in the entire country, is we need a whole lot more accountability. We need a lot more accountability right now in our blue states if we're really going to try to right the ship. So I'm very, very excited about this endeavor.
Well, Antonio, it's not every day that you see the sitting lieutenant governor who ran on the ticket with the governor running against the governor. And so what issue or issues were the final straw for you that pushed you to run against the governor?
Well, there's a number of key issues that I could point to, whether it's housing or the lack of a bold, vision for housing that isn't just about tax crediting our way out of it, whether it's childcare and the need for universal childcare and the absence of that here in New York, whether it's the persistent economic inequality that goes unaddressed because we refuse to really analyze and break down how it is we leverage public dollars in the name of subsidies and tax credits under the umbrella of economic development and keep hoping that change will actually happen on the ground when it never does. These are the kind of things that I don't see the governor actually attacking or willing to really wrestle with and reform, as opposed to just manage through. And when I first became lieutenant governor, there was an understanding that we would govern differently. I was not a conventional pick. I had served 2 terms in Congress. I had 18 bills signed into law, 10 under Trump, 8 under Biden. She was not a conventional governor by way of how she came into power. And we talked a lot about the need to do things differently, both from a budgeting process, but also from a transparency process, and just writ large how we govern and connect with folks on the ground. And unfortunately, it never fully materialized, if at all. And once Trump won, and once you saw the swing from left to right, and once I also witnessed my party put its head in the sand for months, despite what everybody knew in terms of Biden's capabilities to win the race, and basically protected the party and party power at the expense of the people, all these factors led me to believe that we are in a moment of reckoning here. We are in a moment of accountability. And those of us who got into politics, not because we've been in politics for a lifetime, but because we care about our country and our state, we need to step up and do better. And I think New York deserves better from leadership. And so it's a culmination of a lot of factors that in the end really crystallized once we got past the presidential election.
Antonio, I'm very interested. I'm, not to harp on the whole running against the governor thing, but there's something about it that I'm very
Just to be clear, no one cares. But
I'm sure they don't. I'm sure they don't. But I'm a former politician, and so there's an aspect of this that's very interesting to me, and that is that you and I are very close to the same age, within a few years of each other, and in politics, if you're running for a high office and you're under 50, you're extremely young. That's just like how it works, right? You're super young if you're under 50 and you're running for a high office. I was elected to the state legislature when I was 27. I was elected statewide when I was 31. And so what I have a lot of experience with is people telling me to wait my turn. And so when you talk, which I bet you have had no shortage of over the last few years. And so when you talk about a Democratic Party in a blue state that is managing as opposed to being bold, it rings with me. But what I'm interested in for our listeners is, you were elected to Congress, I think 6 years ago, right? And
2018, I was a part of the big blue wave.
Okay.
And by the way, in a upstate district, a 90% white rural district, the 8th most rural congressional seat in the country, a seat that Trump had won by 7 points just 2 years prior, and no Democrat ever won the district. And I won it in 2018 and then won it again in 2020 by 12 points, outperforming Biden by 10. I want to speak to your point.
Well, can I ask I'm sorry, I went long for a question. I'm not a natural interviewer. I apologize. The question I wanted to get to is, I bet that you have some pretty funny stories over the last few months of people trying to politely tell you that this will be disruptive and that you're going to mess with their situation. I would just love to hear a really good story about somebody being, you don't have to name them, but especially ridiculous about asking you to wait your turn.
Well, I'm gonna disappoint you because
it's okay.
I'm not going to give you a story, but what I can tell you is, I never ran for anything until I was 38 years old. I was a part of that class in 2018 that felt compelled to run because of the emergence of Trump. Yes, I voted. I was engaged in political life, but I really did not have a lot of visibility into the party machinery, seniority, hierarchy, gatekeepers, and the like. It was not something that I had any familiarity in. So the moment I decided to run as an outsider, having no real connection to the party, I was already facing doubters on day one.
Yeah.
A lot of folks said, what are you doing? There's no way you can win in upstate New York. You crazy? How? There's no way. And those insiders ultimately ended up being wrong. And I think even when I decided to to go in this direction. You better believe there were folks who were scratching their heads for all the reasons, though, that you really speak to. Not because they're saying, hey, you're not offering a vision that can really resonate. Not because they're saying, oh, you know what? We feel confident about the future of New York, and we feel confident that we can beat back somebody like a Stefanik or a Mike Lawler and make sure that New York stays blue for the foreseeable future. That's not why there's hesitation. To your point, there's hesitation because disruption is a thing that folks in political life don't like because it messes up the way they organize themselves around power and how they preserve their standing in the party. But you see, when you don't make your life about those political inner workings, that's not what dictates the desire to serve. And the thing about Trump that I think is very appealing to a lot of folks, having served a lot of folks who voted for Trump, is the fact that he's not beholden to a party, that he's not beholden to any interest. He's beholden, at least the way it looks. There's a lot of questions about to what extent it's legitimate or not, but he at least comes off like he's beholden to the folks who support him. I would like to be beholden to everybody, but he's very beholden to the folks who support him in a real way. And they like that he's not caught up in the machinery, because the machinery is broken. And there is a way in which both parties are big corporations that are divorced from the realities of folks on the ground. I'm not drawing a moral
I get you
between the two, but in terms of how power operates within both, that fundamentally is what really turns people off. And we as Democrats have not yet found our footing when it comes to calling that out, because a lot of us are too damn busy playing the game.
I think one of the most powerful things that a politician can have is a willingness to lose because they're not so attached to their position that they have. That I've known, I from the time I entered politics, I was an up or out kind of guy, like not because I needed to have a bigger position, because I was like, I'm not achieving anything in this spot, so I need to go to the next spot where I think I can actually make a difference. And there were so many people who were like, I literally had people say things to me like, but your pension will vest in 2 years, And so if you are not afraid, if you can look in the mirror and see Antonio Delgado and not have to see Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado, that voters respond.
My language, man.
Yeah,
you're preaching my language. And I think the lesson of Trump in this moment is it's about morality. It's about your own truth. It's about standing firm on what you believe in. And, our ability in this moment to right the ship isn't going to be through traditional politics, because people are done with traditional politics. The way we're going to connect with folks again is to be real with each other and be real with who we are. And we have to be willing as public servants to put our power on the line. This idea that power is self-legitimating, that because I have it and I'm a Democrat and therefore I shouldn't be challenged. Where does that come from? Why? Last time I checked, this is a free society. We have primaries. It's an open society. We celebrate democracy. I guess we don't celebrate it unless it's the other side, right? So at the end of the day, we have to be willing to hold that mirror up and hold ourselves accountable. And if we can't take that lesson right now, because we did not have to be in this position. We did not have to be here with Trump back in the White House causing the havoc that he's causing, but for the fact that we played party politics. And I know it's hard to hear that, but it's the truth. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you got to swallow the hard truth to really get over it and make the difference. And I'm willing because I give a damn. I actually care about the future of New York and the future of this country and my children and other kids and grandchildren that other folks have across this state and this country, to actually do what is required in this moment. And so that's, to me, you have to have that kind of energy, particularly if you're going to fight somebody like Trump, who's as raw and uninhibited as he is. You can't meet that energy with half measures, or you got to be ready to square up completely and put everything you got on the line.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of a local question, but just what I'm curious about as somebody who lives in the city and lived for years in Lower Manhattan, but grew up in Staten Island. And so I've seen both sides of this equation. This congestion pricing. So for people who are not from New York, the rough sort of story here is that one of the, I think, more chaotic moments of the Hochul administration was when she kind of was in and out on this major policy of congestion pricing that would have would have and maybe still will change a lot of the dynamic of how traffic flows in and out of Manhattan. And as somebody who was just watching it, it was just very confusing to me what happened there. And I'm wondering if you could both explain like what that was and also what your position is moving forward, since it's such a big policy for us who live in New York City.
It's a massive policy. It's a transformational policy. It's one that's incredibly bold. And anytime you make a bold transformational step, you are going to have to wrestle with, as a leader, the fact that not everybody's going to like that. Change is hard. And if you feel uncomfortable, that means you're trying to change something. If you feel comfortable, nothing's changing. And so you have to be willing to navigate through the change. And I think what you're speaking to is we with congestion pricing, which, you know, we haven't done this anywhere else in the country, right? It's only happened in a few other parts in the world, right? And so we were about to be at the forefront, and we still are at the forefront of a massive undertaking to both deal with the congestion and the climate impacts of congestion, as well as being able to leverage some of those funds for our public transportation in a meaningful way. And yes, people can have disagreements about the impacts, but history has taught us that over time, even this unpopular program, once implemented, becomes more and more popular. And we're already seeing that right now with congestion pricing in the state of New York. The challenge was politics got in the way of the vision. Politics and reacting to the way in which the issue was being politicized. So if you don't have a vision as a leader, if you're not committed to where you want to take the state, if you're not saying to yourself, here's where we need to go. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, it's going to take some scars, but I'm willing to lead. I'm willing to push us through this fight because I believe in where we are going enough to push forward. You will ultimately earn more support for your commitment and your clarity of purpose, even if people don't necessarily agree with the whole idea. But if you start to waffle, if you start to sort of veer in and out because you're uncertain about how to play it and you're not really committed to the idea, you're just doing it because, well, it sounds like a good idea right now. Maybe it won't be later. You start trying to make everybody happy, and in the end, you make nobody happy. And what happens is you pause it, as she did. You pause it right before the election, which looks incredibly political. Then we lose the election, and you have to deal with the fallout of Trump now being in the White House and not a Democrat. Then you unpause it, but then try to say we're going to lower the price, and therefore I'm making the deal with folks. Who are you fundamentally making happy? Because the folks who want the program robustly are mad because you pause it and you reduce the price. The folks who think you shouldn't do it at all, they're not happy because now you got the whole thing happening but at a lower price, but that doesn't matter. The price, the program's still in place. So in the end, you're making a lot of people unhappy about a program that if you had just stood behind and pushed through and said, listen, I know it's not going to be easy for some folks, but we believe in this. Maybe you would have got more support along the way. And by the time Trump even got into office, by the way, it would have been already in play and already had enough success and proven success where it would have been less even politically viable for him to challenge it in the courts. And so these are the things where leadership does matter, and being a leader that flows from the inside out, where you're not reacting to everything, but saying, this is what I want to do. This is the vision. I think congestion pricing and how that dynamic happened really is a microcosm of what I'm getting at when it comes to leadership that is more reactive to the moment than it is about driving from a vision that can adjust to any political reality, but not be defined by that reality.
Well, Lieutenant Governor, thank you for joining us. Where can folks check out
DelgadoForNewYork.com.
All right. Where's your headquarters? Are you in Hudson Valley?
DelgadoForNewYork.com. Oh, my headquarters, we're everywhere. My headquarters with the people.
Answer.
That's
you have family. Am I correct that you have family in Saugerties?
Well, yes, my mother-in-law
is a wine store owner, right?
I met her. Small business owner in Saugerties. She's been there for decades. Amazing.
Ravi, you met her?
Is it a wine store, right? I think I met her.
Town and Country. It's an amazing store. And my wife Lacey, she grew up in Woodstock, and in Ulster County. I grew up in Schenectady, so about an hour, 15-minute, drive apart. Our families are all still in upstate. I live in Dutchess County, and my parents still live in Schenectady. And so, yeah, the family is, very much in the Hudson Valley capital region. But I move around the state a lot. I'm in the city quite a bit, central New York, everywhere, really. And I think this is a massive state. It's a big state. It's a beautiful state, tremendous diversity and community. And it's exciting to move around and connect with folks in a real, genuine way.
Well, I love that.
Are you a Yankees guy or a Mets guy?
Oh, I'm Yankees. And I will say,
they're here in Kansas City right now, kicking our ass.
I haven't followed baseball as much as I used to. I used to be a big baseball fan back when the Jeter Yankees were those were the years where I was really, in the mix. If I'm being honest, actually since I've been in politics, really, my sports viewing from basketball, my first love, all the way to baseball has sort of faded away a bit.
Well, Ravi's a Staten Island guy. I'm fifth generation Kansas City, but every summer we go up to Ulster County because that's where my great uncle, who is from Kansas City, but lives up there now, he wrote New York, New York, the song. So that's my New York bona fide. Yeah.
And Antonio, the reason why I was mentioning it, because I go up to Woodstock and Saugerties and Hudson a lot, and I wandered into that wine shop one day, and your mother, I think it was your mother-in-law or somebody related to
my mother-in-law,
overheard me talking about politics and was like, "Oh, do you know my son?" And at the time, I was running an arena which was supporting your candidacy in our very small way, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I think we just sent him $1,000 or something."
I appreciate that support, and shout out to my amazing mother-in-law, Peggy. She is amazing, and the whole family. So I'm glad that we're showing some love to the family.
All right, well, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, thanks for being generous with your time. Good luck out there.
Appreciate you guys. Take care.
See ya.
All right, sir.
That was fun. We usually, when we have people on here, politicians, it is very rare that they are people that, maybe you've met him in person before.
I was trying to remember if I've met him in person. I have a good friend who ran against him in the primary. That primary was stacked. I think it was Pat Ryan, who's the current congressman. My friend Gareth Rose is the one who I supported in the primary, and then Antonio won, and it was such an important seat. And I liked all of the candidates. So
I know Pat.
Supporting him.
It's just funny, like when we have politician guests on, they are almost exclusively people who we just personally know. Yeah. So that was a rare one where I think we were both curious about it. It was, suggested to us, and we are both curious about him, and I really like him.
He's, it's tough. New York, there are a lot of powerful interests, and there's a lot of different pockets of very transactional politics that you have to overcome in a race like this. So you can go one of two routes, and we didn't have enough time to go down this road, but he could either try to cobble together a coalition of people who are dissatisfied with the current governor because she has done the transactional politics wrong, and then maybe throw a little idealism on the top, or go straight idealistic and try to challenge the governor with a coalition of people who wouldn't turn out in a low turnout election like the transactional people do, but who would just because they're fed up with where things are. And I'm to be honest, I have to watch to see where he goes on this kind of stuff, because New York is tricky, and I would say our governor is not good, and so she's left an opening. But a good example is the Bills Stadium, right? Now, it is probably deeply unpopular with downstate, but nobody pays attention to it. But everybody up there is going to be like, I'm a Hochul voter because she delivered on this huge project to basically redistribute wealth from the south to the north, and any Bills fan is going to be for this. So you got Goodwill up there. She represented Western New York. And then you've got all the interest groups throughout the state who, if you're halfway conscious governor, you're going to just from sheer lower C corruption, keep those types of people happy. And if she's done that, which I'm not sure she has or not, but most people manage to do that, then you really need to run against her a very, very compelling, idealistic, attention-getting campaign. And that's going to be his charge. He's going to have to get eyeballs on his campaign in order to win this race.
What really interested me listening to him talk is most of what I digest about politics of New York comes through talking to you, and a lot of the tenor of it is sort of you're often saying look, we have all these great opportunities to do all these great things, and then we just don't.
Yes.
And so what I hear him saying is I think his point about Democrats can't just manage an existing situation. They have to continually be progressing because that's what it is to be progressive.
Right.
I think it's going to resonate. I think it's really interesting. So.
Well, we got this New York mayor's race coming up, which is a true like zig or zag here. We either going to go with Cuomo, who is like
talk about institutional.
Well, you got Cuomo, who's like the quote unquote moderate, right? But who comes with like baggage to say the least. And then you've got a Democratic Socialist candidate who is right now polling second, who is very much in the AOC mold and all that. And talk about like going in very different directions for the city. So this is, and it's in a ranked choice race. So you've got all that chaos and the potential runoff. It is a momentous race for the city of New York.
All right, so what's going on with you? I see that your hand is still bothering you, the wrist.
I'm a little worried it's broken.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I thought it would be. It's now a full week, and I have not been able to play any sports. So, yeah, this doesn't normally.
Do you have you scheduled the doctor's appointment?
I think I'm gonna. There's some spots around here. I'm just gonna wander into one tomorrow and try to get an X-ray. Yeah,
that sucks. I hope it's not, man.
I really. It would screw up a lot of things for me if it turns out to be broken. I'm hoping it's just sprained or whatever. I was thinking to myself about Josh Allen, who played apparently with a broken hand all year with his throwing hand. And I'm like, how the F is that true?
And
like,
won the MVP? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really
You know what he's not though? He's not over 40.
I thought you were going to say Super Bowl champion. I was
no,
I'm
not. You do the trash talk, and we have the trophies.
I have nothing to trash talk about. Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't even imagine throwing a football with this. I could say, and it's not even that severe. It's crazy, but if you notice this year, he would slip this on after the game, and you're like, that's wild. I'm so impressed by these people. They just.
Well, speaking of medical stuff, I had a reminder today of just like why we all hate the way healthcare is set up in this country. And even though it has gotten better over the last 20 years, it's still having to deal with insurance is the worst. As I've talked about on the show, I had surgery for a sports hernia, like abdominal surgery on March 14th. And I remember when I showed up, they were like, okay, you owe, it was like $4,000 or something. I had to put it on my credit card because, and I was thinking, okay, well, that's the rest of my deductible. And so I paid it. And then I've had the hospital calling and trying to get this other $1,000 out of me. And I've been saying, you need to call my insurance because I paid the rest of my deductible at the hospital. And they're like, well, your insurance is saying no. So today I got my insurance on the phone and they're like, oh, well, you have a 20% co-insurance pay. So anytime you get a surgery, you have to pay 20% of it in cash for the overall cost, and then we pay the rest. So yes, you've hit your deductible, but
what the hell is it? Is it a co-insurance versus deductible? Like what the hell is that?
Yeah. Well,
this is another way of saying deductible.
100%. So basically, what I figured out, and by the way, we have like really good insurance through my employer. Like I have a $2,000 deductible. Like that's. When we got our insurance through our employer, we're like, oh my gosh, we have a $2,000 deductible. Like we really have fancy insurance. And I'm not saying that the insurance company screwed me. I'm sure I saw this when I signed it or whatever. My point is just, it sucks. And like, we're doing well, so we can absorb it and it's fine. I'm not like, woe is me. I'm just thinking about how we're doing well. I have the really good insurance. I have the really low deductible. And I still owed, what in total now for this surgery, I've still paid $5,000 when I have a policy that has a $2,000 deductible. Which is to say, like, man, if we ever get unified power again, we just got to really do the insurance and healthcare thing right. Because, like, if you're not doing well and you find out randomly that you owe another $1,000 that you weren't planning on, that'll wreck your year. And so it's just a real life relatable thought I had this morning that I wanted to share on the show.
Dude, even people with good insurance don't have good insurance here.
That's my point. Yeah, that's my point. So, all right. Well, hey, thanks everybody for listening. As usual, please leave a 5-star review. And a reminder that on Mondays at 2:30 Central, we stream The Game Within, which is our show about the the intersection of politics and sports, which we've been getting some great reviews on. Hopefully we can get a review from you if you're listening to this. So get that wherever you get your podcast. If you're listening to this, make sure you also subscribe to Midas Touch on YouTube so that you can get it there. And if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it on YouTube, wherever you get your audio podcast, please subscribe there to Majority 54. You can find me at Jason Kander everywhere on social. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta everywhere on social. Thanks very much to the Midas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.